Welcome, everybody, to the Catholic Professionals Podcast. My name is Andrew Jacoby, and I am really blessed today to be joined by Shawn Peterson, the president of Catholic Education Partners. Shawn, thank you so much for joining.
Oh, thanks for the opportunity, Andrew.
I look forward to hearing about your experience and your ministry and all you've done for the faith. So, in the beginning, I'll start with a just a sponsorship read, and then we'll get into your faith journey and work journey and what you're doing with your apostolate. So, our show today is sponsored by Good Shepherd Staffing, which is my company, GoodShepherdStaffing.com. We help Catholics in developing countries find work that enables them to have a local living wage as well as the ability to work from home. Because in a lot of poorer countries, developing countries, if you live in a smaller town, you either have to go to a really big city to get a job or you have to leave the country, which means it's hard for family formation and family bonding. So we're trying to find work that enables them to make a living. Also, they don't have to leave their families. We start out with a 10-hour free trial. So if you have never worked with a remote virtual assistant and you'd like to try it, we have 10 hours for free to give it a shot. We will pay the people. They're not working for free. We are paying them. And then if you want a full-time assistant, an entry-level assistant will cost you under $1,000, and then we can also staff other roles, and the rate will be dependent upon the experience level and the expertise level of the person. So go to goodshepherdstaffing.com, and end of commercial. So, Shawn, thank you so much again, and could you tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your history, and your faith journey, maybe a little bit?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Yeah, well, thanks again for the opportunity, Andrew. So I went to college and political science and Russian area studies. I actually double majored at a small university here in Minnesota, Hamline University. It's the oldest university in the state. Actually, it predates the University of Minnesota. Um, Met my wife there. Got married shortly after college, and went to work for the Minnesota legislature right away. I always wanted to be. I was kind of a political junkie, political animal. Always wanted to do that. Sort of had dreams about going out to D.C., but that never really just never seemed like it fit with our family plans or anything else. But so I worked in Minnesota legislature for a long time, which was actually a blessing for my work today because I was really grounded in state level policy and state level legislation and other things. So worked there for 13 years in the Minnesota legislature, and then I worked for two Minnesota governors. Had my own lobbying firm for a while, and then I was really actually blessed to go to work for the Minnesota bishops for 5 years. I worked for the Minnesota Catholic Conference for 5 years as associate director for public policy. Worked there and was really kind of the one of the chief lobbyists at the Capitol for the bishops. Under the direction of our executive director, I spent most of my days at the legislature and really got immersed in not only Catholic social teaching but in how that affected legislation and what legislation we were promoting or sometimes opposing on behalf of the bishops. So that was really my training for what I'm doing now, that was an incredible blessing. That if I look back, I see that journey, and it some might say, well, it's kind of disjointed because you did politics and you worked for the church. But if I look back, if I wouldn't have had that training, I wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing today. So as God often does, he if we let him be in control, he kind of leads us on the right path of where we're going. And so so I left the hard nosed politics, went to work for the church for 5 years, and then through that actually came to Catholic Education Partners, and that's been just a huge blessing for me. So Catholic Education Partners was started roughly in 2017, 2018. Really got off the ground with the idea that all this parental choice, school choice was happening, and there really wasn't a national Catholic organization that was working on state level advocacy and policy on behalf of the church and the bishops. You've got the USCCB, but they really work more on federal policy, and then you've got state Catholic conferences, which I had worked for 5 years that do state policy in their individual states, but there wasn't a national organization. It was kind of able to weave a lot of that together and really bring all those groups together for a national effort. And so that's really what Catholic Education Partners does. We're the national Catholic voice for education choice. And our mission is to advocate for public policies that allow more children to attend Catholic schools. We work on religious liberty issues. We work on state level legislation and policies. We don't do a lot of like direct lobbying. We let the locals do that, but we really come behind and try to bring the Catholic community to bear on these policies. So that was kind of my journey. It was not the journey I thought. If you had asked me 30 years ago, like, do you think you'll ever be working for the Catholic Church? I would have been like, no, I want to be in politics. I want to be in the rough and tumble. But now, if I look back, I would never want to go back to working in politics, straight politics again. I love working for the church, and yeah. So
What's the difference?
It's yeah. Some might say, what is the difference? It's kind of a subtle difference. It's sort of knowing that there I feel like there's a confidence that I have when I work on public policy that I'm doing it when I'm doing it aligned with church teaching. There's a confidence there that what I'm advocating for is proper and for the common good. Which I would say when you're in partisan politics, sometimes you sort of question things like, I mean, yes, I know this is what the platform says, or this is what the party says, or this is what my political bosses say, but gosh, I don't know. This doesn't seem to align with my, with my faith values or whatever that might be. And there's a blessing or just a sort of a calmness or just a beauty in knowing that things I'm advocating for, I can back up with church teaching. And so there's just there's a sort of a calmness there that I can do that.
That's amazing. I'm curious, could you, I'm a layman in the world of politics and actual sort of on the ground, how that works, the business of politics, but couldn't you, I guess what you're saying is there's a sort of pragmatism that comes in there where you sort of have to adopt things that are maybe promoted by a political side, but you're not 100% on board with. Couldn't you also just say, okay, well, I'm a sort of social conservative, or I want to promote Catholic social teaching politically and do that privately and have the same sort of be aligned in the same way? Or there is something different fundamentally about being inside the church, like working from the center of the mystical body itself?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose you could. I mean, I think to a point, but I think you're always going to get to a point, and I think we've seen that now with both political parties. I mean, I'm a very conservative person, socially conservative. If you look back, anyone can find this. So I'm not trying to hide. Like, I worked for the Republican caucus. I worked for, Republican governor. I worked very very short time for Democratic governor, but that was only, at the beginning of a transition for an administration. But but if you look today, like if you look at all the controversy now around how the Republican Party changed its platform a little bit, and how even President Trump on the life issue, right? So, for example, that's a great example. I mean, I think a lot of Republicans that, were like arguing like, well, I mean, let's be honest, like, we may not love our political choices right now, our candidates, but you kind of have to pick a side, generally. But a lot of people now the reason they were picking that side is in some ways has gone away a little bit. I mean, it's lessened. I shouldn't say it's gone away. So for some of us, it's, that gets to be then you sort of reevaluate again. But again, for a lot of Catholics, really, there is no good political home right now. And there hasn't really been for decades and decades. There's not like a perfect political home as a party. So yeah, I think as a layperson, it's difficult to just sort of say I'm going to sort of advocate for these things, because I think you always end up there's that battle. I learned that working for the church when I first came to work for the bishops. I came in sort of this very social and fiscally conservative Republican, starting to work for the bishops, and you have to really be open to church teaching. You have to understand, like, I would say on issues like immigration, some economic issues, some welfare issues, things like that. As a conservative Republican, you come in with very much a set of thoughts and beliefs on things, and then the church makes you reevaluate those things and think about some of those things. And so that can be difficult for a lot
Right.
of us that were very set for a long time on what we believed, and boy, we thought this was right. And then the church challenges us as Christ does. I mean, if you look at the Gospels, Christ constantly challenges his followers, whether it be with personal, things that they're trying to shed, or with, the mood of the day, and yeah, so you get challenged, and you have to open your eyes a little bit.
It's really it's so interesting. There's so many ways we could go with this. Like I have a similar experience. I came into the church recently. I'm a convert from the Jewish faith, and I came in already pretty conservative. I was a little bit more libertarian, I think, as it related to economic issues, and I just wanted the government out of my life. I wasn't thinking very much about the common good. And then the Catholic, as you said, this Catholic social teaching comes in, and just the Catholic political vision. I hadn't really started reading people. I don't know if you're familiar with like Patrick Deneen out in
Hmm.
Notre Dame, and these people like post liberals. There's like extreme. There's all kinds of flavors. You have like the integralists. So Adrian Vermeule, Patrick Deneen, maybe I'm not sure. I guess he's a little bit related. Sorab Amari. These people, that want a more sort of church, a confessional state, let's say, of some sort. And then you have the New Polity people out in Franciscan University, Steubenville,
Yep.
who are saying, look, the whole idea of we should go back to some form of the Middle Ages where, you know, any kind of state is going to be cross purposes with the church, and we really need a localist distributed movement. Like what the church teaches about distributism. I'm not saying that wrong, but you
Easy
know what
for
I
you to
mean.
say.
Yeah, exactly. So sort of bottom up, let's just create these communities, and what they're doing in Steubenville, Ohio, is very interesting. There, it's like
Yep.
reimagining the political in a certain way, and they're saying, really, the political is about friendship, is about
Yeah.
relationship with another person and a group of people, because that's our nature, as Aristotle and Aquinas would say, we're social beings by nature, political beings by nature. So, in a way, you can't really have a relationship with Washington because it's too abstract. So we
Right.
really, if we want to do something, what we have to do is build local communities of faith, like they're doing in Steubenville. I don't know if you've been there, but it's sort of like this old kind of Rust Belt town that now is being reborn with serious Catholic families, and they're reimagining and really consciously trying to say, what would a ideal political order be like? Because Christ is the king of all. So there is no real, the idea of a separation of church and state, quote unquote, is odd because it's a Christian idea, number one, the idea of render unto God, which is God, and Caesar unto Caesar. So it's a Christian idea that there is any kind of separation because the Romans gods were Caesar's was a god, Caesar
Right.
Kyrios. Um, and and then it's this new thing which is like, no, there is this realm of conscience, but there's no such thing as the secular because God is all. Christ is the truth, and he touches everything. He is right. It's sort of existence itself. So it's a strange. What I'm saying is my brain is scrambled with all of this new Catholic information, like you were
Yeah.
talking about. With just like,
Yeah.
okay, I thought I was one way. I really thought I was like America, and I'm like, well, wait a minute, maybe like modern social contract theory is a little too individualistic, and right. So that's really interesting, but that's why it sort of sparked all of that. I'm curious your thoughts. This is a more political question, but I'm curious. Like, I was reading recently in National Review, Hadley Ark said that part of the problem we had with the change of the Republican platform was because in Dobbs, the court punted on the moral substance of the case before it. So, with the moral substance of the case was, what is the child? does the child have 14th Amendment standing as a individual, right? Like, and therefore equal protection. So it's an equal protection case essentially. It all, and what it said was it went positivistic. No, it's just sort of whatever procedure. It's like, so they made a procedural decision. They kicked it back to the states. The government, we're going to be as a nation silent on the humanity of the unborn, on the right, are they rights bearing or not?
Right.
And because of that, it put the Republican Party, according to ARCs, like that put us in an impossible political position in a certain way. So that's one case, but I also hear other people saying like, no, you have to advocate and not compromise on abortion because it like, and because we can make that case and win. It's sort of like the pure social conservative movement within the conservative, let's say broader movement, is the only thing that's having any effect. I mean, look at the, this year during, let's say, Pride Month, for example, there was like a sort of like a less excitement from the corporate world about this
Yeah.
year's Pride Month, and that like
Yeah.
there's more pushback in the school districts about pornographic material in the schools. So the only victories that the right is really having, actually, are the socially conservative kind of positions. So I don't know. I'm a little rambly there, but what would you say? Do you have any thoughts about this from a political perspective, or as you're within your new position of working in the church, sort of how you look at these issues?
Yeah, I think it's yeah, I know I think you're right on Dobbs. You've got this new just came out, I think it was just a couple days ago on the IVF. I think the court basically kind of ruled that, IVF's and that it is a person basically. I didn't read the entire decision, but yeah, no, I think you're right. They sort of did kick it back down, which um, I think a lot of people consider it a victory because then at least they knew a lot of states were going to outlaw it, were going to ban abortion. So I think people look at it as a victory that way. But you're right; it didn't kind of get to it didn't, let's say, get to the question of like with the question of slavery, right? I mean, the court just said it's not a rights issue, right? I mean, it's a moral. We're making a moral judgment here for the
Amen.
entire country, right? And so this was sort of I mean, it wasn't opposite of that because I still think people looked at it as a victory because it wasn't the courts were actually, it was kind of the best middle ground right now, maybe for now is the way of saying it, because it was the courts saying no, this is not a right, it's not a federal right, it's not a national right, and so we're going to kick it back down to the states. But they also didn't say that it's an intrinsic evil and we're banning it from on high, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
it was kind of a half a loaf, maybe. It was a step in the right direction because there's a lot of states now that have made a moral judgment. Their Supreme Courts or their legislatures have made a moral judgment. But then you've got other states, like I live in Minnesota, and we've got obviously Governor Walz
Yeah.
running for vice
Walls.
president. But we've got a state where it's he signed a horrible bill on
Post
basically.
birth abortion.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, pretty much. Yeah, I think we've got of eight cases of for sure documented cases where children were just basically allowed to pretty much suffer and die due to botched abortions. And so, and then he cut funding for crisis pregnancy centers and did all kinds of bad stuff. That's just on the life issue. He's done horrible stuff on gender, on gender mutilation for minors and all kinds of. But anyway, yeah. So I think it's and you were talking about integralism and really subsidiarity really is what we're kind of talking about here. And yeah, it's always an interesting thing when I talk. I've got conservative friends, I've got progressive friends, and I've got libertarian friends. And I think progressives always think that like libertarians and conservatives are always, copacetic on everything, and they're really not. And there's a lot of conflict, I think, with libertarianism and church teaching because, libertarians can tend to be very socially liberal, right? Because they just kind of want people just leave me alone, don't tell me what to do. But that's not really what Christ did. Like that wasn't really Christ's, he didn't, you know, I always say that the church doesn't impose, it proposes. It proposes, not imposes. So it's sort of,
Mm.
I think that's why I love being a Catholic, because people are like, oh, you've got so many rules and you've got, I'm like, you know what? But here's what I've got. I've got four walls, but anything within the walls, I have freedom. Like I can do, and they're big walls. It's a big sandbox. I can play anywhere in the sandbox and with any of the toys. But yeah, there are limits, and there's rules, and I think society today wants to knock down all four walls, and that just creates like chaos.
I think,
And
yeah,
so
totally.
there is something with the beautiful thing about being Catholic too is we have 2,000 years of history and teaching to rely on and reasoning for these things. These are not willy nilly. These are not just, oh, we just don't want people to have fun. Like we don't want people to enjoy life or have fun. No, it's not that. It's we want people to enjoy life but to truly enjoy it and to be happy, and we will the good of the other, right? I mean, that's part of Catholic teaching. You will the good of the other. Like you want the other person, you want people to go to heaven. You want them to enjoy eternity with the Lord. And so we know there's a formula for that at some point. We know there's things you can and can't do. And so it's not about imposing like, oh, we want to, impose these things. If I saw this great meme, I think it was yesterday. I've seen it before. It was a good point. Basically, if religion is man-made, if God is man-made, it doesn't make sense because basically it's everything that man really likes that's bad for him, that he desires, we say no to. So if it were man-made and we wanted to be popular and have lots of members, we'd be like, no, you can do all this stuff, it's all good, you can be what that's how it would be. It wouldn't be this sort of more restrictive. It would be like, hey, go, it's like if you look at ancient Rome, if you look at the gods, and like it was all about pleasure and doing what you want, doing what feels good, and not really worrying about your neighbor. Well, why did that religion die out? That died out because it's not grounded in truth.
Mm. Yeah.
It's not, everything that's not grounded in truth eventually will dissolve, will go away. So that was kind of a long answer to your. I'm not sure I
No,
really
it's
even
great.
answered your question.
It's very inspiring, the idea you that you were sort of feeling this dissonance in your soul when you were just a political animal, let's say. And you're saying, well, yes, I love politics, but politics isn't the ultimate end. It's not. The ultimate end is the church's is to bring as much as we can of Christ's teaching to the world. And that's and there's a political element to it. I'm sure you experience politics within the church. It's an unavoidable aspect of being human because it's in our nature. So it's
Sure.
unavoidable, but it's not the highest end. The highest end is truth, as you said, and love. And
Yep.
that's what Christ's message was. It's not one versus the other. It's both and. That's what I love
Yeah.
about the Catholic faith as well. It's a both and faith, sort of. Yeah, it's not anti-pleasure. That's a very much more of a sort of like, there's this view of morality in general, I think, today, which I think comes from the more Germanic philosophical strains like Kant and these things, which is like a sort of tisk morality. Whereas the classical view was that morality is just more about flourishing as the kind of thing that you are. Like you have a nature, a human nature, and in order for you to live as the highest instantiation of a human being, you have to understand your nature and do those things which are ordered towards its flourishing, and not do those things which aren't, which will addict you and make you less than what you could be. So it's about they use more. The Greeks would use more. I think the word is kalos, where it's like more of a metaphor of beauty, like as in athletics. So like
Hmm.
for example, so morality would be, look at Roger Federer hit a forehand in tennis. It's like It's the highest form of that thing. That's
Right.
morality in a way. It's like living a beautiful human life, not a deformed, less than human life. You know, here in Philadelphia where I live, we have this neighborhood called Kensington, which is basically an open air drug market. And I have a podcast down there called From Kensington with Love. Look it up on YouTube, everybody. And I spend a lot of time down there, and it's just, according to the modern world, those are the freest people in the world. They're free to do heroin or methamphetamine or whatever they want to smoke, or they're free to sell their bodies in order to
Yep.
finance this addiction. So, if freedom is do you, they're winning that game. And yet, if you go down there and speak to them, you see it immediately that they are in desperate bondage.
Yeah.
Desperate
And
bondage.
terribly unhappy. Terribly unhappy.
They're terribly unhappy, desperate, and they know it.
Yep.
So we go down there and pray with them, and they are so open to prayer because
Yep.
they know that they're and so it's just a perfect example of what you're talking about, which is that your true flourishing, your true freedom is to accept the truth
Yep.
of what you are and what you need. And the church is the expert in what the human person needs because it's had 2,000 years of really smart, really wise people thinking about it.
Yep.
So that's really beautiful. What would you say is the school choice thing? What is sounds like the main work of your apostolate is trying to, or is that just one aspect and there's many aspects? Is that how is sort of the ability to get more students into Catholic churches? I'm sorry, Catholic schools. Is that the sort of main purpose
Yeah,
of
that's
the
our
of the
main goal really is to advocate for parental choice policies around the states, and we've done that a lot. We've since we've started, I think there's been I think we've had 11, something like 11 states have gone like created universal choice programs where parents can make all parents in that state have an opportunity to choose the best education for their children. It could be Catholic school, it could be other private school. It could be public school. Public school. If a parent wants to choose the local public school, they can do that. It could be charter school. It could be a homeschooling. It could be a hybrid. It could be, a mixture of a little bit of each. But really, that goes back to, the common good and what parents are. There's a beautiful church document that actually came out of Vatican II. Gravissimum Educationis, and that's on Christian education, the translation. But it's really there's a beautiful line in there that just says that parents are first educators of their children, and as such, have a right to choose the education that is best for their child, basically. And it also goes on further that says actually therefore the state has a duty to assist parents in that work, including financially supporting them in those decisions. So
Mm.
that document in 1965 was really sort of one of the first school choice policy documents to say that parents are the first educators. They have the primary responsibility to educate their children, and they have a right to choose which school is best for their children, and the state has a duty to help them do that. And so, yeah, that's our primary work. Our primary work is we work with secular organizations, we work with Catholic organizations and the bishops and their state Catholic conferences. We work with other policy folks in states to ensure that these laws, that these laws get passed and that they're used fruitfully. We just passed the million child mark. There's 1 million children now on private school choice programs in 30 plus states. There's 70. I think we've got 77 programs in 32 states, 33 states now.
Mm.
So yeah, it's really just about giving parents the opportunity. And I would say that because you'll have opponents say, well, parents have choices. Like there's private schools in every state, and there's charter schools and there's homeschooling. I mean, parents already have choices. Yeah, you do if you're wealthy, or upper middle class, and certainly if you're wealthy, you've always had choices. You have lots of choices. You have choices where you can eat wherever you want, you can shop where you want, you can travel, you can live in whatever neighborhood you want, you can drive the kind of vehicle you want, you can go to the doctor whenever you want, if you're sick. But if you're poor, or middle class and struggling, you don't have those choices without help. And so that's really how we counter that. We say, you know what, every child, those in poverty, middle class, everyone should have the choice to choose the education that best fits their kid. And I would say, if you know what, public school's working for you, and you like it, and you have a great local district school, more power to you. Like, I'm not looking to force you to come to a Catholic school or force you to leave that school. I'm just saying, don't force kids that are stuck in those schools that it's not working for them. Don't force them to stay because they don't have the economic means to go somewhere else. And so, really, that's what that's why we do find a lot of friends on this issue in the libertarian community. Libertarian community is very strong on education choice, as is the conservative community. But actually, if you look at national surveys, you look at a lot of state level, and even nationally, you get about 65+% of Democrats actually that actually support. So it's not a right or left issue among the populace. It gets to be more of a right or left issue in legislatures and with legislators. But the American public actually overwhelmingly supports these programs and allowing parents to have the opportunity to select the best school for their children, which makes sense. I mean, there's nothing anymore that we can't choose. Like, if I don't like this coffee shop, I've got 20 other coffee shops within 5 miles of my house that I can go to now, right? If I don't like what my local department store carries for dress shirts, well, I can go online. I can order dress shirts. I can order dress shirts from London, and they'll be here in a week, right? So I've got all these choices now. The most important choice a lot of people don't have is the education they're going to give their children, which is going to launch them for the rest of their life. But a lot of people have one choice, and so that's why we advocate for that.
Yeah, and that choice is compromised in all the issues that we were talking about earlier in terms of their, they have a very particular view on things that is, let's just say, in all the important ways, very different from the church.
Absolutely, and we also have to remember that even like 40 years ago, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, when we were in school, I mean, I look back, I'm going to be 54, so if I look back 40 years ago and I think about end of middle school, high school, it's a very different educational. But even then, education's never been neutral. Like, no education's neutral. Catholic education is not neutral on issues, and district public education is not neutral. Thomas Dewey was not neutral in his beliefs. If you look at Dewey, I'm sorry, not Thomas, John Dewey.
John Dewey, yeah,
Dewey, if you look at John Dewey, John Dewey was a communist and was not neutral on beliefs and attitudes. I mean, it was very much, American public schooling is based on the Prussian factory model. The idea was, we need to give people just a little more education so that they can work better in the factories. They can run the machines. They can do. That was the original idea. That's why you have people like Rockefeller and Getty and all these guys, all these really wealthy guys that owned railroads and factories and everything. They were big supporters early on of American public schooling, and people think, well, gosh, why would that be? Because they certainly didn't send their own children to these schools, right? They sent their own children to very elite private prep schools, mostly kind of what maybe would be considered today a classical school, right? they gave their own children that education, but they wanted most of the American public a little more educated so they'd be better workers. They'd be more obedient, better workers. And that's, that's the foundation for that. It wasn't to teach them to be independent thinkers and to flourish. It was, they put a lot of money into, building the local public school, not because they were altruistic or because they were philanthropic or whatever. No, they wanted slightly better educated workers.
They
They
needed
weren't
like to
looking for them
convert
to
the farm
flourish.
hands to the factory hands.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Because we were also switching from an agrarian to a, you talked earlier about
Yep.
kind of Steubenville and like the kind of the agrarian movement, and there's the Catholic land movement. Kind of, you've got big Catholic families moving back out to rural areas to kind of like get away from everything. So we were moving from an agrarian to a factory, an inner city. And so anyway, it's fascinating. People don't know history anymore. First of all, that's a problem. We know social studies, but we don't teach people history anymore, and that's a huge mistake. And then people don't know the history of American education and why it was really started. Everyone thinks now it's a sacred cow, and it's like, oh, it was to create this wonderful educated citizenry that could flourish and everything. Well, it's not really. If you look back at Dewey and if you look back at the Prussian factory model, that's not why American education, it had other purposes. Let's just say that, and maybe those
Amen.
purposes are still. I think we're still seeing some of that, right? Like in the wokeism, and we're trying to. The old saying, the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world, right? Well, the hand that gets kids, has kids' attention for 8 hours a day. Most kids, when you're in school, like you're getting more exposure. You have longer with your teachers than you do with your parents for the most part during a typical day,
100%.
right?
100%. Well, Stephen, Sean, I'm sorry. Thank you so much for taking the time today. It's been really interesting. I could talk to you for hours about these subjects. I think they're so interesting, way beyond business, and it's just very deep questions. Um, but I've got a call. You've got work to do. So maybe you could end us in a prayer. And again, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us a little bit about, your journey into working for the church as a professional.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to you. I mean, this is great. I love your. I'm gonna definitely check out some of your other podcasts and your guests and stuff like that. And I just grateful for being here. And I always like prayer to Saint Michael because I feel like we're
Mm.
constantly under attack. So I like
Amen.
I like to end with that if I can. It's
Do
anyway.
it.
So, name of the Father, the Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray. And do thou, Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, cast into hell Satan and all evil spirits who prowl about the world seeking the ruin of souls. In the name of the Father,
Amen.
Son, Holy Spirit. Amen.
Well, thank you so much, Sean. I really appreciate it, and hopefully, I'll have you on for a further discussion of all these things.
I'd love to. Same with you. I'd happy to sit down over a beer or a scotch sometime and just have a
Amen.
long conversation with you. It's be
Sounds
fascinating.
great. Awesome. All
Great.
right, signing off.